Hello and welcome to a presentation on what COVID-19 antibody tests can and cannot tell us. This is a summary of an article written by a woman named Stacey Mckenna. She's a medical anthropologist and a freelance journalist. My name is Osama Oda. I'm a Master's of Public Health Practice and a student of Civil Engineering at Wayne State University. I wanted to present this article to you today because it really relates to my discipline and also speaks a lot to what we're going through in the United States. McKenna writes this informative article on how COVID-19 antibody tests are being interpreted across the United States. I broke her article down into three parts. The first being what current perspectives are out there on testing right now. The second being the uncertainties about testing. And the third being the issues these uncertainties present. Right now, antibody tests are exciting and states are optimistic about using them. And those tests are pretty exciting, really, because they could inform community responses and solutions. Epidemiology is the biggest area that antibody testing informs right now. Epidemiology is the study of the transmission of disease. And really what we're hoping gets answered by these antibody tests is how prevalent is COVID-19 and other questions like when will we have herd immunity? Herd immunity is when we have more people who've gotten the virus or been vaccinated than people who haven't. Maybe we ask questions like how is asymptomatic transmission occurring, or how long a person will be immune to a virus. These antibody tests may help us with all of these things. However, there are uncertainties, and these uncertainties when it comes to the interpretation of these tests can really become problematic if we're not careful. The first uncertainty is that there are a lot of tests on the market right now, and some of those tests are on the market because of the emergency use authorization. We have to ask ourselves, are all these tests to the same standard? And are they all being evaluated the same way? Well, to build on that, the Center of Health Security establishes certain standards. They say that it has to have an 82 to 100% sensitivity and a 91 to 100% specificity. Sensitivity speaks to whether or not a person who has the disease actually gets a positive result on a test. And specificity is if a person is negative for the disease and they actually don't have it, whether they actually get a negative result on the test. Another uncertainty is in the idea that a test has to be very accurate to really draw a conclusion about prevalence. And it depends on what conclusion we're really looking to draw. So if we're looking to draw a conclusion between whether or not the prevalence in a community is 3% or 5%, a test has to be a lot more accurate than whether or not it's above 50% or below 50%. So we have to be very careful which tests we use to draw which results. So communities and states aren't necessarily equipped to make those kinds of assessments. That's more of a job for biostatisticians or epidemiologists. Additionally, and really the last point is probably the most frightening point, is in the case of a false positive, and these false positives occur in these tests, the lower the infection rate in a community, the higher the number of false positives. And that's seen really when you have, for example, a test that has a 95% specificity and sensitivity. That 5% is exacerbated in a community in which they have a very low prevalence of disease, and that leads to a lot of false positives. So the lower the infection rate, the higher the number of false positives. And this leads to a number of issues. And those issues can be broken down into two components: false positives and false confidence. When we talk about false positives, we're talking about when we're drawing from antibody tests a lot of false positives, we may begin to underestimate the hospitalization and death rates. We think there are a lot of people who have the disease, and so we have lower rates of hospitalization and death. And so we begin to assume a false sense of security. And that false sense of security can also happen when a person who has a false positive begins to believe they're immune and as a result becomes less cautious. False confidence happens when a person gets a positive result on their antibody test. They actually do have antibodies. They believe they're immune, and they believe that they have a low chance or a no chance of reinfection. And we just don't know that. Right now, the science doesn't say that a person who has antibodies will not receive or have the virus again. This can lead to obviously some recklessness. So altogether, antibody testing is beneficial and informative, but we have to be careful. It has a lot of uncertainties, and those uncertainties are still not fully understood. To interpret antibody tests, it should be left to the professionals, and it's really a research domain at the moment. So scientists and communities alike should be cautious when they interpret these tests, and they should really think about what premises they're building on when they draw results from antibody tests. While we have a lot of optimism related to them, we have to be careful and we have to cross-check a lot of things when it comes to drawing a premise from an antibody test. And McKenna really broke that down in her article, and she really brought it home that we have to really just take this carefully and slowly as we learn more about how these tests can be used. Thank you for your time, and I hope you benefited from this presentation.